In Planet Reddit, today's story is...
My narcissistic sister-in-law demanded that we send our newborn baby to daycare so she could rest. 7 days later, her belongings ended up on the street. Last month, my husband's younger sister decided to move in with us. She is currently studying at university, and instead of staying in a student residence like most students, she decided that lifestyle did not suit her. She felt that the environment did not suit her personal needs. So she took the initiative to look for accommodation off campus. The problem was that rents in the area are quite high, and it was difficult for her to afford a place on her own. She also didn't want to share a flat with strangers, so she decided to approach us for help. She explained to us how living with us would allow her to save on rent and overheads. She asked us if we would agree to take her in temporarily until she could make new friends and eventually move in with them. My husband accepted immediately without thinking twice, but I had some reservations. The reason for my concern was that I had just given birth barely 2 months ago. As you can imagine, the whole process of pregnancy and childbirth has been quite overwhelming. Now that we have a newborn baby, taking care of him has not been easy at all. Although my husband helps out a lot at home, he is also the one currently working. I am still on maternity leave, and not only do I take care of my baby, but I also do all the housework. The situation is already quite complicated, and adding another person could make it even more difficult. My newborn is a very demanding baby. He cries frequently, and sometimes wakes up at unconventional times during the night. He also sleeps very lightly, so any noise, no matter how small, will wake him up, making it even more difficult to get a good night's sleep. My husband and I have tried different strategies to help him establish a more stable sleep routine, and we really hope that this phase will pass and that he will eventually be able to sleep peacefully through the night. But for now, it's still a constant challenge. In addition, I have found it really difficult to keep up with the housework. I am always so exhausted from looking after the baby that I barely have the energy to do anything else. The dishes pile up quickly, and the laundry seems endless. There always seems to be something pending to do, but I just don't have enough energy to keep up with everything. So when the proposal came up for my sister-in-law to move in with us, I couldn't help but feel insecure. With everything I was already managing, I wasn't convinced I could deal with another person in the house. To make sure everyone's expectations were clear, I spoke directly to my in-laws and my sister-in-law about the situation. I explained that if she moved in, she would have to occupy the basement and would be responsible for cooking and cleaning for herself because I simply could not take on those additional tasks at the moment. At the time, my sister-in-law seemed to fully agree to these conditions, so I agreed to her moving in. At first, things seemed to go well. She generally kept to herself and respected the agreement we had made, but as time went by I noticed that her attitude gradually began to change. For example, during meals, my sister-in-law frequently commented that I should improve my cooking because she always found something wrong with my dishes. My husband never complained, but his sister constantly had something to criticize. She also suggested that I should probably consult with her mother and my mother-in-law about one of her favorite dishes so that I could prepare it for her. I found it quite strange. She didn't like my cooking, and on top of that, she expected me to prepare her favorite food. I declined politely. I explained that she was welcome to cook whatever she liked if she didn't like what I served. I told her that I was also very busy, and trying to prepare specific meals just for her was complicated in my current situation. She looked at me with obvious disappointment, but didn't insist further on the subject. In addition, she constantly monopolized the television set all day long instead of attending her classes. For me, watching entertainment programs while I fold clothes or cook is one of the few ways I can relax and distract myself since I gave birth. But she likes to watch other programs, and although she could easily watch them on her tablet in the privacy of her room, she insists on using the main TV and ends up monopolizing the living room all day long. This leaves me no space to enjoy anything on my own. To make matters worse, she leaves a considerable mess around her. I found chocolate wrappers on the floor, empty bags of crisps, and other rubbish scattered everywhere. I tried to talk to her about it, but she replied by saying that she never used to clean when she lived at home with her parents, and that she was still learning. I tried to be understanding and cut her some slack considering she is still young and learning to stand on her own 2 feet. But it is starting to feel like I am the one doing all the cleaning, and it is completely exhausting me. I have been picking up after her as much as I can, but it is getting exhausting. Last week I decided to inspect her room in the basement while she was out and was completely shocked when I saw how dirty it had become. Before she moved in, we had renovated and cleaned the basement so that it was spotless. We had bought her a new bed and a wardrobe, but now there were stains and dirt everywhere. It was hard to believe that she had allowed her space to become so messy. I really thought she had been cleaning up after herself, but it was clear that she hadn't been doing it at all. I can't stand being in messy spaces, so I was tempted to clean it myself. But then I reminded myself that she is an adult now and needs to start taking responsibility for her own space. So I decided not to clean it. If that wasn't enough, she doesn't do her own laundry either. She constantly leaves her dirty clothes in a basket, waiting for me to take care of them. She tried to do her own laundry a couple of times, but apparently didn't know how to sort it properly. She mixed all the clothes up, and all her clothes came out with altered colors. Since then, she has simply allowed the clothes to pile up and expects me to wash them for her. It's really frustrating because I'm already doing so much, and she doesn't seem to be making any effort to look after herself. So, overall, my sister-in-law has been a terrible guest in our house. Despite everything she has done, I have kept my composure and tried not to create conflict. She constantly reminded me that this situation was temporary, so it wasn't something I would have to deal with for long. My husband has also noticed the problems and has been helping out considerably. He has tried to talk to his sister and encourage her to be more collaborative in the house, but things haven't really changed. Then yesterday I got a call from my in-laws. They sometimes call to check up on us, so I thought it would be just another casual conversation. However, this time my mother-in-law started telling me that my sister-in-law had been complaining to her for several days that she wasn't getting enough sleep at our house. Apparently, our baby cried a lot at night, and this had started to affect her rest. My mother-in-law went on to explain that her daughter needs a full 8 or 9 hours of sleep to feel refreshed and ready for the day, and she was worried that we were depriving her of that necessary rest. I tried to explain to my mother-in-law that although I fully understood her concern, it's not like I was intentionally waking the baby up to annoy her. This is simply what babies naturally do. They wake up during the night. I mentioned that my sister-in-law was occupying the basement while my baby and I were on the second floor, so any noise she might hear would be very faint. I even suggested that I could buy her some earplugs to help her sleep better. However, my father-in-law intervened and argued that it wasn't just about the nights. He said that my sister-in-law was also exhausted during the day due to too much discomfort in our house, which was also a concern for them. Honestly, I reacted with disbelief. My sister-in-law literally spent most of her days lying on our sofa watching television. In fact, she would often fall asleep right there in the afternoon after lunch, just resting while I moved around taking care of all the responsibilities. So where did this supposed exhaustion that she apparently felt come from? It didn't make any sense to me. All I am trying to do is look after my baby, and now I have to worry about making sure my sister-in-law is comfortable too. I felt like I was being blamed for something I had no control over, and I was starting to feel really frustrated. I couldn't help myself, so I told my father-in-law how we were doing everything we could to make his daughter feel comfortable in our home. I made it clear that if she wasn't satisfied with us, she would always have the option of finding another place to stay in the city. After all, we were allowing her to live here rent-free. And if she had so many complaints, she really should consider living elsewhere. This was not well received by my in-laws. They seemed quite offended by my response. My mother-in-law immediately began to defend my sister-in-law, stating that apart from these small complaints, she was actually happy living with us. My mother-in-law reminded me that we were a family, so we needed to make concessions in some aspects so that everyone could live together harmoniously. It was then that she suggested something that took me completely by surprise. She said that she and my father-in-law would be willing to pay for me to send my newborn baby to a nursery so that my sister-in-law could have a quiet day and get proper rest during the day. I was completely stunned, and for a moment I thought that maybe I had misunderstood them. They hadn't just suggested that I leave my newborn baby in a nursery just so that their precious daughter wouldn't be disturbed by any noise during the day. It was honestly hard to process. Here I was trying to take care of my baby while dealing with all the stress of running the household. And now they wanted me to put my newborn in a nursery just to make sure my sister-in-law could have some peace and quiet. I couldn't believe it. It felt completely inappropriate. I was speechless for a moment. It was as if they were completely ignoring the needs of our family, the needs of my baby, and everything she was going through. All just to make sure their daughter was comfortable. I'm not going to leave my newborn baby in a nursery just because your daughter is complaining, I argued, raising my voice. How can you suggest something so absurd? I was outraged. I had just given birth, and there they were asking me to put my baby in a nursery just to accommodate their daughter's complaints. It seemed completely unreasonable and unfair. They were lucky that we even agreed to take their daughter in the first place. I continued trying to keep my composure, but the indignation was about to get the better of me. But no, they want us to adjust everything for her. Absolutely not. I could tell that my words hit a nerve. My in-laws tried to argue more, but it only made me more annoyed. They insisted that what they were asking of me was not at all unreasonable. They said I needed to calm down and take some time to reflect on the situation. How could I stay calm when they were completely ignoring what was important to me? This was our house. My first priority was to take care of my baby, not my sister-in-law, who was a grown woman and needed to take responsibility for herself. My father-in-law told me that if things were too much for us to handle, they would be willing to start sending some money to help with my sister-in-law's shopping and other expenses. Up until that point, my husband and I hadn't asked them for a penny. We had been covering all their expenses without asking questions. Money wasn't a problem for us. I felt they were trying to avoid the main issue, which was their lack of respect and understanding for what I was going through. I was overwhelmed, exhausted, and already doing more than enough. The last thing I needed was to be asked for more concessions that would only benefit their daughter. It was too much to take in. I couldn't help feeling that they were completely out of touch with what was really going on in our house. So, am I the bad guy for getting angry about my in-law's suggestion? Update 1. When I told my husband what his parents had suggested to me, he was just as upset as I was. He couldn't believe they had had the audacity to make such comments to me. He wasted no time in calling them back immediately and starting to argue with them. I could hear the indignation in his voice as he spoke. I was standing up for myself, and I wasn't going to tolerate that kind of behavior. He told them that after even suggesting that I should leave our newborn baby in a nursery just so that his sister could sleep better. "Don't forget that you are talking about your grandson," he said in a firm voice. "Do you want us to leave our son in a nursery so that my sister can get some rest? That indolent girl sleeps all day long and skips her classes. Believe me, she sleeps more than enough." I felt as if a great weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Having my husband defend our family in that way meant a lot. He wasn't going to allow his parents to make unreasonable demands of us, and he made sure they understood that he wouldn't tolerate it. He was as frustrated with the whole situation as I was, and it meant a lot to me that he was so firm in defending our family. But it didn't end there. My sister-in-law has also started acting as if she has every right to complain about us. In fact, she approached us with a list of complaints saying that she felt we hadn't been doing enough for her. She actually told my husband and I that we should be better hosts by cooking for her and cleaning up after her exactly like her parents did for her. She said all this while looking directly at me, which made it even more frustrating. I could tell that she was deliberately trying to make me feel as if I was not pulling my weight, as if I should neglect my newborn and take care of her instead. My husband was not willing to tolerate that behavior. He was direct and clear with her. He told her bluntly that she was an adult attending university, and if she needed someone to clean up after her and cook for her, she could hire a service person or go back to her mother. None of us were going to take responsibility for treating her like a child. "We are not prepared to take on another baby," he said, making it clear that we had enough with our real baby and all our other responsibilities. My sister-in-law did not take these comments well. She began to cry, clearly trying to present herself as the victim. She argued that she was not asking for too much and that we were family after all. She wanted us to feel guilty for not doing more for her. It was clear that she was trying to manipulate the situation by using the family link, but my husband was not moved by her tears. He stood firm, and I was relieved to know that we both shared the same perspective. It was as if we were finally defending ourselves and our family, and it felt empowering even though the whole situation was exhausting. Honestly, I am so angry with my sister-in-law at the moment that I am seriously considering asking her to leave. I am at the end of my tether. What is the point of her living with us if all she is doing is creating unnecessary conflict in the family? It seems like all the stress and tension has been building up because of her, and I am simply fed up. If we hadn't agreed to help her, I would never have been drawn into these arguments with my in-laws. I could have concentrated on my baby and my own life without all this additional chaos. It's frustrating because we didn't ask for any of this. I also want to clarify that my in-laws are not exactly bad people. They have never tried to control me or cause problems in my life before all of this. They have always been kind and understanding in the past, but this situation with my sister-in-law is completely different. It is unique and is only happening because of her behavior. She goes to them and complains unnecessarily. My in-laws don't seem to understand how comfortable she is living with us. They don't seem to see how much we have been sacrificing to help her. Instead of being grateful, she is complaining about things that don't make sense, and it is honestly very frustrating. My sister-in-law literally has a roof over her head, free food, and no rent to pay. She has the privilege of not worrying about these things, but she still feels the need to act as if she is being treated unfairly. I try to be patient, but at this point it's starting to feel like she's taking advantage of our kindness, and it's putting a strain on my relationship with my in-laws. I'm exhausted from all the drama she's causing, and I really don't know how much more I can take. Update 2. Well, my sister-in-law really crossed the line this time. It happened last night, and I'm still trying to process it. In the middle of the night, my husband and I were suddenly woken up by loud noises coming from the basement. At first, we were both so confused and disoriented that it took us a moment to really understand what was going on. Then we realized that my sister-in-law was organizing a social gathering in the basement. The worst part is that she hadn't even bothered to inform us that she was going to have guests. She didn't ask for our permission. She didn't give us any prior notice. Nothing at all. The music was playing so loud that we were afraid it would wake up our baby. We were outraged. I mean, how could she do this without even considering the fact that we have a newborn in the house? My husband and I could not tolerate it any longer, so we quickly went down to the basement to confront her. What we witnessed there was shocking. She was sharing with 5 other people, and they were all clearly under the influence of alcohol and other substances. The place was a complete mess. There were intimate personal items used on the floor, and it was unpleasant even to look at. I couldn't believe that all this was happening in our house. My husband was absolutely furious. He started to order them to leave, and rightly so. We didn't even know these people. They were complete strangers who had been brought into our house in the middle of the night without any authorization, and with a newborn baby in the house, no less. We didn't know who they were or if they posed any danger. They could have been dangerous people for all we knew. My sister-in-law, clearly under the influence of substances, started laughing as if it was all a joke. She told us to relax as if nothing was wrong. Her friends were rushing to leave because my husband had threatened to call the authorities if they didn't leave immediately. It was as if he didn't even take the situation seriously. I was furious, too. I ordered her to turn down the music immediately. I explained that the noise could wake the baby, but she simply laughed at me and then said, "It's always about the baby these days. Don't do this, don't do that. Nobody thinks about me since that baby came into our lives. You and my brother are no fun anymore." I looked at her in disbelief. It was then that everything really made sense to me. I finally understood what the underlying problem was. My sister-in-law was jealous of our baby. It hit me like a sudden revelation. You see, before we had our baby, my sister-in-law was the youngest in the family. She was the one who always received all the attention and affection, and my husband and I were always available for her. We are quite a bit older than her, so we have always treated her with great consideration. Every time she visited us, we showered her with attention and took care of her without complaint. I guess that's why she wanted to live with us initially. She thought she could continue to receive the same preferential treatment. But circumstances have changed now. My husband and I have become parents. Our priorities are different now. Our baby is our world, and everything revolves around him. That's what it's like when you become a parent. Our lives are no longer focused on having fun and being carefree as we used to be, and I think my sister-in-law just can't adapt to that new reality. She's not used to not being the center of attention, and I think it bothers her that she doesn't get the same level of attention as she used to, and that's why she's been complaining about us to her parents. I guess that's also why she wanted us to send our baby to daycare so she could spend more time with us. Meanwhile, my sister-in-law kept telling me and my husband how she wished things could have stayed the same and how we would never have treated her like this if the baby hadn't been born. Hearing this, I told her straight that she was being childish and immature. She was an adult, and it was time she started taking responsibility for herself. We weren't her parents or her carers. I wasn't going to compromise my son's well-being just to make her feel better. I could see clearly now that this living arrangement was never going to work properly. It was causing too much tension and too many problems. So I told her she needed to move out. I made it clear that the situation wasn't working for anyone and that she had to find somewhere else to stay. Fortunately, my husband completely agreed with me. He supported my decision and told his sister she had 1 week to pack up and leave. If she didn't, we would pack up her belongings and leave them on the driveway. At that point, we had had enough. We couldn't continue to allow her to disrespect our space and our family. I was tired of trying to make the situation work. It was time for her to leave. My sister-in-law started raising her voice and shouting at us, calling us selfish for throwing her out. She kept repeating over and over again that she had nowhere to go and that we had no right to ask her to leave like that. She was furious. It seemed as if she was trying to make us feel guilty so that we would change our minds. But my husband, who had been more than patient up to that point, had reached his limit. His response was firm and direct. The last time I checked, this is our house. So yes, my wife and I can ask you to leave whenever we want. There is no lease agreement to protect you. Go and cry with Mom and Dad. But we've had enough of you. It was hard to hear her scream. But at that point, we both knew we could no longer tolerate her behavior. She had crossed all the lines, and it was time for her to face the consequences of her actions. We had tried to be patient. We had tried to be understanding, but it wasn't working. She was taking advantage of our kindness and our home, and we just couldn't tolerate it anymore. Since then, my in-laws have been contacting us incessantly, begging us not to go ahead with our decision. They have been calling, sending messages, and trying to convince us to retract our decision. My mother-in-law thinks we are being too harsh on her beloved daughter, and my father-in-law is asking if we could at least give her 2 months to find another place to live. They don't understand why we can't just give her more time to work things out. They're both acting like we're being unreasonable for wanting her to leave. But the truth is that my husband and I are not backing down. We've given her enough chances, and we're tired of being manipulated. It's really difficult because we never expected it to come to this. We didn't want to create so much tension between us and my in-laws, but at the end of the day, we have to defend our family. We have a baby now. We can't allow anyone to disturb the peace in our home. I know it's difficult for my in-laws to see it from our perspective, but we have to do what's best for us. And right now, that means sticking to our decision, no matter how much pressure they try to put on us. Update 3. As some of you may have anticipated, my sister-in-law did not leave even after the week we gave her. She completely ignored the deadline, so we had no choice but to take decisive action. My husband and I packed all her belongings in several boxes and placed them in the driveway, just as we had warned her. We didn't want to go that far, but at that point, we had made it clear that she needed to move out and she was not respecting our decision. When my sister-in-law returned and saw her belongings in the street, she completely lost control. She was furious and started screaming and banging on our door out of sheer frustration. You could tell she was beyond upset, but honestly, we couldn't feel sorry for her. She had been given enough opportunities and had disrespected each of our established boundaries. To make matters worse, 1 or 2 of her boxes had even been stolen while they were left outside. Of course, she was even more upset about that, but at this point, I just couldn't feel sorry for her. She was banging on the door, pleading, saying she had nowhere to go and was basically homeless. It was hard to listen to her pleas, but we stood our ground. We told her we would provide some money for her to stay in a hotel for a few days, just to give her some time to get her affairs in order, but after that, she would be on her own. Just to clarify, her parents are willing to pay for her student residence, and there are lots of people at the university looking for roommates. All my sister-in-law needed to do was find a place, and her parents would pay for it. But she was too lazy and clearly thought we weren't serious about asking her to leave. I know it was hard to remove her belongings, but it was the only way we could make her understand that we were not going to tolerate her behavior any longer. Of course, my sister-in-law didn't stop there. She immediately called my in-laws and begged them to intervene, hoping they could convince us to let her return, or at least give her more time. But by this point, my husband and I had made a final decision. We didn't want to hear any more excuses. We even refused to take her calls. We knew they would try to make us feel guilty so that we would change our minds, but we had already made up our minds. We couldn't turn back now. In the end, my husband gave my sister-in-law some money, and she had no choice but to reluctantly request a transportation service. Then she collected the few boxes she had left and left our house for good. It was a difficult moment to witness, but honestly, we had been more than patient with her. And now it was time for her to grow up and live independently. Although I feel a little sad that it had to come to this, I also feel a huge sense of relief that she has finally left. There was so much tension in the house when she was here, and now that she's gone, I feel like a huge weight has been lifted. We can finally get back to our normal routine without all the stress and constant mess. There is still a lot of work to be done, especially with redecorating and thoroughly cleaning the basement where she had been living. But now that she's gone, I feel like everything is much more manageable. I have a lot less to worry about every day. I no longer have to clean up after her or deal with constant conflicts. I can finally concentrate on what really matters, taking care of my baby and restoring harmony to our home as it should be.